They are home. The first phase of President Donald Trump's peace plan has been completed and has been a resounding success. It's been way more successful than many would have imagined. On October 13th, the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza returned to Israel, thus ending the main justification for continuing a war that has lasted 2 years and 2 days. But now, with no hostages, with Hamas extremely weakened and Israeli forces withdrawn from large areas of the Gaza Strip, the really complicated part begins. We've already talked about this on VisualPolitik. Now is when the real all-or-nothing gamble begins. It appears that Hamas has done it again. The group has re-emerged and is back on the streets in several areas of the Strip. Following Israel's partial withdrawal, militants and alleged police officers from the Palestinian group are regaining control in several districts, particularly in Gaza City. Specifically, the Palestinian group has mobilized some 7,000 troops, whom it has called up in record time. Some battalions have been formed in just 24 hours, and many militants are receiving calls and text messages with instructions to take up arms and deploy to the streets immediately. All this under the pretext of ensuring security and preventing chaos. Take a look.
Hamas mobilizes fighters in Gaza as fears of internal violence mount.
Not surprisingly, this is beginning to cause great concern, because it's something that many experts in Israel already warned about, but which no one wanted to take into account when designing the peace plan. Basically, because then it would have been impossible to get anywhere. Let's remember that. According to the first phase of the agreed plan, Israeli troops will withdraw to positions closer to the border. In fact, it's estimated that right now, roughly half of the Strip territory no longer has an IDF presence. Well, this is exactly what was planned, but there's one problem. Without Israeli troops, someone is going to take their place. There will be no power vacuum. And that is exactly what's happening. And it's good news, because as I said before, following the withdrawal of Israeli troops, it is Hamas forces who are taking to the streets again. And this is where the problem arises that could seriously jeopardize the next phases of the peace plan. Hamas is regaining control of the territory. And when I say control, I don't mean just directing the little traffic there is, making sure there's no looting in markets and things like that. No, when I say control, I mean precisely this.
Hamas fighting in streets with rival militias after Israel withdraws terror group executing members of Dormish family in attempt to assert power.
For several days now, the images coming out of Gaza have been horrific and extremely alarming. And while leaders celebrate peace, there are some developments that are causing deep concern. Hamas is once again applying its savage iron fist in the areas where it has managed to deploy, and they are literally hunting down anyone who opposes them or who opposed them during the war. Of the estimated 7,000 Hamas militants who have already been deployed, some 2,000 are said to be exclusively dedicated to fighting rival groups. That's not even the worst of it. Videos of summary executions in public streets are being circulated on Telegram channels affiliated with Hamas. Obviously, we cannot reproduce these videos here, but we can tell you what they show. They show people blindfolded and handcuffed in the middle of the street, being shot in the back by Hamas militants wearing balaclavas, in front of crowds who are recording the proceedings and celebrating with cries of Allahu Akbar. In some of these executions, up to 8 people have been killed at the same time. These are scenes that, believe me, are difficult to distinguish from others we've seen in the past with groups such as the Islamic State. It's Hamas's way of reminding everyone that they are still standing, that no one should be mistaken, that even if they're not part of Gaza's next formal government, they'll still control the streets, and that no one should dare to disobey. And not only that, there are also small street fights with gunfire between Hamas and rival groups, the most violent of which are taking place in the Sabra neighborhood of Gaza City. It's almost like a new war. And here's the thing, this may only be the beginning. Do you know why? Because what's happening looks like the beginning of an internal civil conflict in Gaza. A spark that could grow into a full-blown civil war between rival groups and clans in the Strip, and a witch hunt against alleged collaborators with Israel during the IDF occupation. Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering, who exactly is Hamas persecuting? Who are these rival groups and clans fighting for power in the shadows? What can we expect from the next phases of Trump's peace plan? Well, we're going to tell you all about that next, because many of you may not know this, but within Gaza, there's growing opposition to Hamas's reign of terror. And here's the most interesting part. Some of those groups have rather unexpected allies. Pay attention.
Crushing the enemy.
As I was saying a moment ago, Hamas is currently fighting rival groups in Gaza in what could end up becoming a full-blown civil war. And here, many of you are probably thinking, okay, I know enough about Hamas, but who are these internal rivals? Who dares to stand up to them on their own territory? Well, this is where we get to a story that many of you might not know. Because even before the war, Hamas didn't control Gaza as tightly as many might think. Because although Hamas officially controlled the Strip, not everyone obeyed its orders. For years, there have been clans and minority groups that have stood up to them in very specific neighborhoods and districts, and they do so for very different reasons. Some answer to Fatah, Hamas's old enemy that governs the West Bank through the Palestinian National Authority. Others are even more radical Salafists, loyal to Al-Qaeda's ideology. And yes, there are even groups supported by Israel. Yeah, you heard that correctly. And of course, now, with Hamas weaker than ever after 2 years of war, with Israeli troops in retreat, and with an agreement that excludes them from power, the Islamist group has gone into panic mode. It wants to nip any attempt at internal rebellion in the bud. It wants to reassert its authority on the streets. The result? An express offensive against its enemies within Gaza. And the clashes are brutal. In just a few days, dozens of fighters have died in clashes that are not being talked about as much, but which could change the balance of power in the Gaza Strip. Now, let's get more details on the table. Who exactly are these factions? What do they want? And why now? Let's start with one of the most feared and historic groups, the Dogmush clan. Okay, so much for the basics. But let's talk about the group that everyone is talking about these days, the Dogmush clan. Because yes, there are several clans in Gaza that oppose Hamas, but Dogmush is by far the most powerful of them all. Now, who exactly is this clan? Well, pay attention, because we're not talking about a political party or just any militia here. We're talking about one of the most influential family clans in Gaza, with a strong presence in the Sabra neighborhood we mentioned earlier. And in the midst of the chaos of war, they've moved swiftly. According to various sources, they've looted weapons warehouses abandoned by Hamas and taken advantage of the situation to arm themselves to the teeth. This is nothing new. In fact, the clan's origins are almost a story of betrayal, because Dogmush emerged as a splinter group of Hamas between 2005 and 2006, just as the Islamist group was taking complete control of Gaza after a brief civil war against Fatah. And so while Hamas was becoming the de facto government in the Strip at that time, Dogmush broke ranks and became even more radicalized. Its ideology is even more extreme. It embraces a Salafist jihadist line in the style of Al-Qaeda. In fact, they use their symbols, their black flags, quote Bin Laden, issue threats against the United States and the United Kingdom, and talk about global jihad, not Palestine as a national cause. In other words, if Hamas is an Islamist movement with a political and nationalist agenda based on controlling Gaza, destroying Israel, and ruling Palestine, Dogmush goes further. Theirs is more of a holy war, and they aren't alone. They have their own armed wing, the Army of Islam, a group with links to Al-Qaeda itself, which is currently fighting Hamas most fiercely in the streets of Gaza. Why are they doing this? To try to displace Hamas and take control of the streets in anticipation of what is to come. In recent days, some media outlets have run suggestive headlines. Israel is allegedly supporting Hamas's internal enemies. But beware, the story is not that straightforward. Because yes, some of these rival groups may be receiving outside help, but the Dogmush clan does not exactly fall into that category. In fact, its armed wing, the Army of Islam, has attacked Israel on more than one occasion. They have launched rockets, attacked IDF patrols, and even kidnapped Israeli soldiers. In other words, they hate Hamas, but they also hate Israel and anything that smacks of the West. The difference is that their war is not so much about territory or a nation, but instead even more ideological and religious. As I said, we're talking about a group that wants to impose its Salafist vision at gunpoint, and anyone who doesn't fit in, be it Hamas or Israel, becomes its target. So how did we get to the point of seeing shootings and summary executions between these movements? Well, according to local sources in Gaza, it all kicked off on Saturday the 11th of October. On that day, Hamas attempted to take control of an old abandoned hospital with the intention of setting up a new base there. The problem, the building was already occupied, specifically by fighters from the Doqmush clan, and what should have been a simple logistical operation for Hamas ended in a bloodbath.
The hospital had been used as a refuge by the Dormish family after their homes were destroyed by the Israeli army. Hamas reportedly demanded that the family vacate the hospital, but they refused, leading to an exchange of gunfire that resulted in several Hamas casualties, including the son of Commander Ahmed Akel.
The confrontation ended, as we've seen, with several dead, dozens arrested, and yes, public executions. Many of those detained were summarily executed, and since that day, Hamas has vowed to hunt down every member of the clan until they're wiped out. In fact, the message is loud and clear. If you dare to challenge our power, this is what awaits you. And to make sure the warning spread far and wide, Hamas distributed videos of the executions on its Telegram channels. They want everyone to see it. But they've also offered a carrot: amnesty for those who lay down their arms. Supposedly, anyone who does not fight against Hamas will be eligible for amnesty until Sunday, October 19th. And after that, well, after that, things could get much worse. Because Hamas doesn't just want to survive, it wants to take back control of Gaza with an iron fist, even if only informally, by ruling the streets, just like the Iraqi insurgency, the remnants of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party, and the Republican Guard did under US occupation. Do you remember that? I'm sure you do. The United States controlled the administration, but the streets, that was another matter. And that's what caused the conflict to drag on until the Americans could no longer bear the casualties, the attacks, and the constant war. And that's something they now think Hamas could try to replicate in Gaza. Hamas and other groups like the one we're seeing. And this should concern us greatly, especially Trump, who's made this peace plan his own. Because, as we mentioned earlier, the real flaw in the plan was that it never defined who would control Gaza between the Israeli withdrawal and the arrival of any supposed international authority. In theory, Hamas should disarm and hand over power to a transitional government backed by a multinational force, a force that doesn't yet exist, isn't defined, and whose soldiers and lives are still uncertain. Countries like Indonesia, Egypt, and some Arab and European nations have been mentioned, but nothing has been finalized yet. And here comes the big problem. Right now, there is no alternative government to Hamas, and the Israelis have already left large areas of the Strip. And to make matters worse, Hamas doesn't seem to have the slightest intention of surrendering its weapons. So in short, the Strip is in an institutional vacuum with a radical group trying to consolidate its power just when it should be in retreat. And if Hamas does manage to regain full control of Gaza, the second phase of the peace plan could become much more complicated, because right now everything is riding on one card, and the risk of the House of Cards collapsing is extremely high. Now, as I said before, Doqmush is not the only group standing up to Hamas these days. At least two other groups, smaller but equally determined, have also entered the fray. And here's the interesting part. In these cases, there are direct links to Israel. Apart from clans such as Doqmush, there are other armed groups in Gaza that are fighting Hamas. And pay attention, because in these cases, there may indeed be a connection with Israel. We're talking about groups such as Yasser Abu Shabab's Popular Forces, active in the city of Rafah, in the southern tip of the Strip, and the Al-Mujahida clan, based in Khan Yunis, also in the south. So what exactly are these groups, and why does Israel appear to support them? Well, let's start with the Popular Forces. This is a new militia created in the midst of war last year, with only a few hundred fighters. Its leader, Abu Shabab, is a Bedouin who spent several years in Hamas prisons for common crimes. No ideology, no politics, just a guy with a score to settle. Now, if you're imagining a secret Israeli cell operating in Gaza to overthrow Hamas, you can forget it, because what we've here is something else.
Israel is providing weapons to a jihadist group in the Gaza Strip affiliated with ISIS, opposition lawmaker and former defense minister Avigdor Lieberman said.
Several reports suggest that this is not a simple local militia, but a jihadist group that could have connections with the Islamic State, and also with the Palestinian National Authority. According to some Israeli media outlets and opposition figures, the Jewish state may have been discreetly supporting this group in southern Gaza with limited weaponry. In return, of course, the group was expected to directly confront Hamas. and all of this through the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence agency. The objective would be twofold. First, to minimize casualties among its own soldiers, and second, to weaken Hamas from within with surgical strikes, infrastructure sabotage, and even the creation of small alternative models of government. But Hamas was quick to react. At the end of 2024, its men stormed the Abu Shabab neighborhood, leaving more than 20 dead, including the leader's brother, and yet the group remains active. And then there's the other group we've already told you about, the Al-Mujahideen clan, based in Khan Yunis. This clan has also created its own militia. And yes, it's also fighting Hamas these days, but that's not all. The Al-Mujahideen have even set up a camp for displaced persons, offering food, shelter, and protection with Israeli logistical support. It's a kind of safe zone beyond Hamas's control, set up shortly before Israeli troops began withdrawing from southern Gaza. And of course, this is no coincidence. In part of what many analysts call Israel's Plan B, a strategy that had been months in the making for precisely this moment, the moment of power vacuum following its withdrawal. VisualPolitik community, this is how things stand right now in Gaza. Between jihadist militia groups more radical than Hamas and clans supported by Israel, the Strip is on the brink of something much bigger, an internal war. And yes, Hamas is weak. Very weak, and its enemies are jumping at the chance to try to seize the power they could never conquer by force of arms. The problem is that there are too many players, too many clans, too many agendas, and too much accumulated revenge. This is no longer just Hamas against everyone else, it's practically everyone against everyone else. And in the meantime, Gazans are no longer fleeing Israeli bombings, they're fleeing shootings and executions among Palestinians. And this could turn out to be a major blow to Trump's peace plan. Because if Hamas continues to regain ground, the message it sends to the world is not that of a group willing to relinquish power, it's just the opposite. And let's not forget a crucial detail. Within Hamas, there are factions that don't even want to hear about surrendering their weapons. So yes, the plan could be derailed. And if that happens, the consequences are unpredictable. That's why it's urgent that countries wishing to support the stabilization of Gaza coordinate their efforts immediately. International transitional forces must arrive before it's too late. Because if Hamas manages to re-establish itself as the only force capable of maintaining order, Gaza could sink into absolute chaos. It could descend into a large-scale civil war, or even permanent Israeli military occupation, which would be disastrous for both sides. Of course, the arrival of international troops would not be enough either for the plan to really work. They must arrive with the determination and resolve to fight these groups decisively. That's why at VisualPolitik, we continue to believe that this is the crux of the matter. What will really decide whether we're looking at real peace or a house of cards. But while we watch to see how events unfold, it's your turn. Do you think Hamas will regain control of Gaza? Do you think Trump's plan could fail and that the Palestinian group will not surrender power and its weapons? Could Gaza end up plunged into a real civil war? Well, leave your comments below and let's see what you think. But first, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik so you don't miss any new uploads. As always, thank you very much for watching. All the best. I'll see you in the next one.